Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Arcane Secrets of the Craft. This week's episode will be on the first great tree of Magick, Sorcery. First, I'd like to apologize for this episode being so late. The reason for this is I had to edit it down because it was over an hour long, so I had to distill it down to what you might consider or describe as the most important information to know about the great tree of Sorcery. That said, this episode is still going to be about a half hour long. I will not be going into any real detail on energy manipulation and techniques in this video, as in later videos I will be going into greater detail on this topic, as I will eventually get into all the techniques, or at least most of the most useful techniques for meditation and energy manipulation, eventually. That the natural born and trained sorcerers will need to know, and I would only be repeating myself needlessly. Now, some of the techniques or energy manipulation can be useful for anyone of any path or practice, but they're going to be mostly useful for sorcerers. And techniques of meditation will just generally be useful for everyone, just like knowledge on the chakras will be useful for everyone. They just have a more pronounced use in sorcery than anywhere else. Let us begin. The great tree of sorcery concerns itself with inner power. This power comes from within inside of a sorcerer themselves. That power comes from the creation of what is understood as the universe. Everything in the universe, big and small, contains a small portion of that essence within inside of it. Sorcerers contain a far larger portion of that supreme power that is trapped within inside of every individual, and that is what fuels the sorcerer's power that they draw from. In Western occultism, it is believed that sorcery is powered by the soul, or the essence of life. In Eastern occultism, it is seen as the chi, chakra, or prana. In Egypt, it was associated with the power of the Ka or the Heka, and this is all true to a certain degree. A sorcerer is tapping into the great power that resides within only a few of us. Most people would ask if we all have a soul, why can't we all practice the art of sorcery? And that is an excellent question to ask. To a certain degree, anyone can study the practice or the art of sorcery and become a sorcerer, sorceress, or mage. The answer to that question is a twofold answer I have separated into two categories. The first being natural born, and the second being trained sorcery. I will explain the difference between them individually. Also, this would be a good and appropriate time to mention the title of sorcerer, sorceress, and mage and what they mean. A sorcerer is the male or the masculine title, while sorceress is the female or feminine title, and mage is the unisex title for male or female, or a genderless title referring to either masculine or feminine energies equally. Now, this would also be a good time to mention that sorcery in the modern age has been redefined and renamed as X-ray sensory projection, or ESP. As many different practices of the craft are now being re-examined and being re-looked at through a modern lens of science, time-honored traditions and practices are being redefined to meet the limited understanding science has of the practice of magic. When a scientist is able to quantify and mathematically understand how to utilize these abilities or gifts, they will then relabel our ancient practice of sorcery as science, as they did with alchemy before it. Now, this will be also a good time to mention that the natural born and the trained sorcerers have a few things in common with each other. 1. When a mage is in their youth, they are usually arrogant after a humbling event from overestimating their personal power, skill, ability, causes them to gain humility. Generally, they become patient and respectful as they mature. 2. They're both highly independent individuals, leading insulated lives. 3. They're usually introverted, caring for their own company more than others. 4. They both share a high degree of respect for knowledge and understanding of any given topic that involves independent research into the esoteric fields of study. 5. They both highly prize intelligence, knowledge, wisdom, dedication, perseverance, either or more than any other trait an individual can have. They both spend a large amount of time in meditation or contemplation before coming to any specific conclusions or putting their thoughts to pen and paper. 7. They both jealously guard their secrets unless they are directly mentoring or teaching their student, which would be generally chosen very, very carefully. Also, I like to mention I'm not a good example of this personality trait because I'm making these videos and I'm sharing my many years of knowledge and study and research with all of you. To help give you some perspective on these 7 bullet points, I'm going to frame them into a short narrative to help exemplify them, to give them a little flavor of life to them. When a sorcerer is in their youth, regardless if they're a natural born or a trained sorcerer, most are gifted, but it's far more common amongst the natural born that comes with the inherent downside of arrogance. A sorcerer at this stage at his development may lead him to take on a shortcut or take on some challenge that is well beyond his skill level at this time, leading to a humbling experience. From that humbling experience, most people will gain a real sense of humility and then take a good hard look at themselves and reevaluate the true extent of their skill, knowledge, and abilities. At this point, many people will willingly slow down their own practice to engage in a deeper, more serious study of the craft. This deeper study and understanding of Magick can inherently cause a mage to become introverted, preferring their own company over others. From past experience and years of study, mages come to regard knowledge, wisdom, dedication, and perseverance as some of the highest characteristic traits an individual can have. Now armed with years of hard-fought knowledge, after years of meditation and deep contemplation, only then will a sorcerer write down all the secrets they have learned over the course of their long life. When it comes to passing on the secrets of a mage, they will not share these secrets easily unless they're passing these secrets on to their students. This is because by their very nature of being a mage, they're secretive, and they covet their knowledge and their secrets. They've uncovered over many years of a lifetime of diligent study and research and practice. From their many decades of their lives spent seeking answers to questions, most people would have long since given up on trying to answer at all. There are some rituals that are so rare and so obscure, there's almost nothing known about them at all. There are many that begin looking for these answers, but then realize after a certain point there may be no answers to find. Let me give you an example of a ritual that is so old and so obscure it has become legendary. It has even found its way into modern pop culture. The story, or the ritual, known as the Skinwalker. There is only a few small fragments of this ritual that is still known to exist. What is known can be seen as a mosaic of fragmented pieces, a puzzle so to speak. Many practitioners have tried to reconstruct or backwards engineer this ritual. To the best of my knowledge, none have succeeded. Now this mosaic may only be able to be seen as a whole when compared to other distant religions, cultures, traditions that have a similar ritual or ritualized story of a legend or myth with its roots based in truth. When we look at this from this perspective, we can glean how this ritual may have been reenacted or how it may have been enacted. To help exemplify the point, I'm going to have to take you on a short detour down a rabbit hole. To give perspective, let's examine the striking similarities between the Navajo Skinwalker and the European werewolf. Each of these stories, or legendary rituals, both share some of the same characteristic traits. By comparing and contrasting each of them against one another, we may be able to glean how this ritual was enacted to its fruition in the first place. Now, we only have a few portions of these sets of stories that nearly every source can agree on. By studying both of them, we can see the common links between them, and using what we know from both cultures, or both areas of study, we can somewhat reconstruct how the ancient ritual would have taken place and how to achieve the transformation. Both cultures or traditions can agree there's a specific esoteric ritual that would be needed to be performed to achieve the transformation from man to animal. In the Western tradition of occultism, you would need to sell your soul to the devil or demon. In the Navajo tradition, you would need the aid of a spirit to perform the transformation. These are reasonably the exact same thing. The difference of perspective of culture, religion, and belief associated with them. Both agree you need to don the pelt of an animal that you have slain yourself. Now, this is about where the similarities between the two end. Now, taking what we know about Western, Eastern, African, South American, and Native American occult practices, traditions, and rituals combined, now we can start to piece together how this ritual is supposed to work. By taking elements of different cultures using modern techniques, you can somewhat backwards engineer ancient rituals that have been lost to us. If you can draw on enough source materials from enough different cultures and practices, By doing this, we can piece together ancient rituals. This is an example of the kind of dedication a sorcerer would have to have, either of a natural born or trained, as it could take decades to accumulate all the different knowledge and techniques, combined to reconstruct and enact a ritual of this magnitude. This pursuit of arcane knowledge is an all-consuming drive, pushing a sorcerer forward. Now, I will try to briefly explain what a natural-born sorcerer is, with their advantages, disadvantages, and their philosophy. A natural-born sorcerer are born to be a sorcerer, sorceress, or mage. Now, depending on your philosophy, all people and all things are born with a soul or a spiritual essence. Sorcerers possess within inside of themselves a deep and meaningful connection to the spark of the ether itself. Simply put, a sorcerer has more essence of the ether inside of them naturally. An individual born with a connection also is born with a mark that separates an individual from all others, that identifies us as a sorcerer or a sorceress. This mark is the manifestation of the connection to the ether itself, that grants a sorcerer several advantages. Because of events like the burning times, I will not divulge what the mark is. Only because once you know what it is, it's easy to spot one of us. This is one of the very few secrets of my tradition I will not be sharing publicly. I'm sorry. Now I will briefly go over the 4 advantages, 3 disadvantages, and the philosophy of the Great Tree of Sorcery. The first advantage is having an intuitive understanding of what magic is and how to utilize it. It is something that cannot be taught, it must be known. No difference than having the instinctual ability to breathe without conscious thought. The understanding of what magic is goes beyond words. That has to be known already within inside of an individual, like having a splinter in your mind. This is what allows a sorcerer to understand how to use and combine what can appear as conflicting schools of thought, while utilizing normal practices combined with abstract philosophies and principles into one cohesive practice. At times, this can appear as paradoxical thinking, allowing a sorcerer to get from A to C without using B. This allows a sorcerer or a sorceress to see paths and avenues of thinking or research that would elude others, that allows those of us from the Great Tree of Sorcery to make connections that others would miss or simply overlook. The second advantage of a mage is being able to sense the essence of magic. This can present itself in a myriad of different ways. It can accompany a physical feeling of nausea, a migraine, an itch, a specific ache in the body without any discernible source. It can present itself as a feeling such as static electricity in the air surrounding a sorceress. It can present itself as an invisible force pushing against the mage. This sense can also present itself as something visual, similar to seeing heat waves on the ground from a distance, or a specific series of colors that will cloud an individual's sight. Every sorcerer or sorceress would experience this in a slightly different way. A particular use of this ability is knowing when people are working gray or black magic against you. These are just to name a few. Now, this skill of sensing the buildup of energy is by no means an exclusive ability known only to those of the Tree of Sorcery. Most practitioners will eventually pick this ability up along the way. The difference is those of the Tree of Sorcery are born with this ability and know of it from their first waking memories, and very likely before that as well. The third advantage of the Great Tree of Sorcery is one of raw power. A sorcerer has innate power that dwells within inside of them, an immense amount of natural power to draw from, with an excess of power or energy that the average craft user simply does not possess. This is where the word sorcery derives its name from. A sorcerer is the source of their own power. The fourth advantage to those of us of the Great Tree of Sorcery is that we have innate abilities, usually 3 major and 3 minor. Major abilities are seen as active as an individual is able to exert their will or control over them to a greater or lesser degree. The 3 minor abilities work on a more subconscious or instinctual level, making these abilities passive. When these abilities are passive, they are considered minor, as an individual can exert either no control of them or very little. The same abilities that could be considered major could also be considered minor, for the most part. The only real difference between them, realistically, is the level of active control an individual is able to exert over them. Major abilities associated with sorcery are telekinesis, pyrokinesis, electrokinesis, hydrokinesis, atmokinesis, to name a few. Minor abilities associated with sorcery are usually clairvoyance and most of the derivatives thereof, mediumship, or second sight. Second sight is the ability to see into the future. It can be used or utilized in a lot of different ways. These are just to name a few. Also, some of these passive abilities can also be activated during specific environmental situations as well. Over time, a mage may be able to exert a small degree of control over these minor or passive abilities to an extent. Some of these passive abilities can be trained to activate by a mental command or by using an incantation, but this would still remain a passive ability unless a high degree of control can be utilized by the sorceress. But with enough time and effort and dedication, it is possible to train most minor abilities to be major ones, but this is still highly uncommon, but it is possible. The first disadvantage is also probably the greatest disadvantage for those of us with the Great Tree of Sorcery. This comes when we are still children, when we are at our most vulnerable for a variety of different reasons, but mostly heavily dependent on the elders that surround us. Also heavily dependent on the culture the sorcerer or sorceress may find themselves in, this can have a dramatic impact on a fledgling mage, as well as the path they will walk in life. Now, this could of course be said about anyone, but because of the natural gifts a sorcerer or a sorceress has, this can place a young child in a very precarious situation. Now, let's look at some of those possibilities. The first and best set of circumstances for a child from the Great Tree of Sorcery they can find themselves in is if one or both of their parents are a mage, and one or both of their parents already know how to control their abilities and would have either a strong understanding or at least have an idea of how to help teach and guide their child. Second, being in a loving family that will simply not understand what the child is going through, but will try to comfort them while doing their very best to help guide and protect the child. Third, the people around them may not necessarily mistreat them, but they may not necessarily take care of them. Instead, they may try to help teach the fledgling mage how to harness their power for their own advantages. Fourth, a child from the Great Tree of Sorcery may be seen as unlucky or be treated unkindly, having a mild neglect, making them an outcast from the people that are meant to love and protect them the very most. Fifth and final, the child can find themselves in a position where the elders around them simply see the child as cursed. When this occurs, nothing good happens, I assure you. The second disadvantage of abilities comes when the natural born are still children. They're born with gifts, as stated before, but at this stage, these gifts can be far more of a curse. As children, their abilities can manifest in a variety of different and fantastic ways. Some children's abilities may be more pronounced like telekinesis, while other children's abilities may be more subtle like clairvoyance. When the natural born are still children, these gifts may or may not necessarily frighten the child themselves, but they generally have the effect of scaring everyone around them. To simplify the point, if a child has the ability of telekinesis, this can be a mesmerizing ability to their peers, but can also be dangerous if the child becomes angered and then mentally pushes their friend down a flight of stairs. This can equally be as frightening to the child as it will be for everyone around them. The child will have little to no idea how to control their abilities. If the child has more passive abilities such as clairvoyance, knowing what their parents really think of their strange child, this can be easily mentally overwhelming for a child. These abilities can be very upsetting to a child. It will terrify them in a deep and profound, life-changing way. This is the main reason why the natural born are at their most vulnerable and are in the most danger depending on the 5 reasons I stated before. As you can see, as I have now exemplified the point, the natural born's abilities are either major or minor, by their very nature can make the young mage an outcast among their peers or even their very own family. This is why it is one of the most critical times in the development of those of the Tree of Sorcery. As our gifts begin to manifest anywhere from 2 or 3, and then mature anywhere upwards of 13 years of age, where a young sorceress would be able to then manifest all of her abilities, major and minor alike. This is the point when the natural born will either learn to embrace their gifts or deny them. That's why it is so important to train a young mage from an extremely young age, so they will know how to harness and control their abilities and will not be frightened of them. Also, so they do not lose or forget how to use these abilities as they grow older into adulthood. The third disadvantage for those of the Great Tree of Sorcery is living a solitary life of study and practice. One of the biggest disadvantages of being a mage is having an insular worldview, making most sorcerers introverted, solitary practitioners, making it generally difficult for those of us of the Great Tree of Sorcery to work together with others. As a sorcerer, sorceress, or mage are also known for jealously guarding their secrets, as well as their wealth of knowledge. Most sorcerers will go through their entire practice with having highly limited contact with any other practitioner of any other tradition, art, discipline of magic. Most practitioners of the Tree of Sorcery generally view this disadvantage as an advantage, as a sorcerer will become a master of many disciplines over the course of their lives. This may take decades to achieve true mastery of the craft, but nothing worth doing is easy. Most sorcerers take this in stride and also have a deep sense of pride for being able to have achieved true mastery of the craft on their own, or with the possible exception of having a mentor or master to guide them along the way. Generally speaking, sorcerers are unable to share the burden of the research, thanks to their mistrust of others gained over a lifetime, in no small part thanks to their abilities that generally allows them to gain some kind of insight into people around them. Combined with a single-minded focus and pursuit of knowledge, this set of circumstances creates a very lonely existing for those of the Tree of Sorcery. Now, I would like to briefly mention the philosophy of a natural-born sorcerer, and that is a sorcerer does not need any external forces to work magic. A sorcerer has all they need from within sight of themselves. A sorcerer is literally the source of their own power. A sorcerer rather rely on their own unique abilities, skills, and knowledges, so they do not need to rely on the use of herbs, or crystals, or even other people. But these other elements can also aid and augment a natural-born sorcerer's power, as well as aid them in their future successes. A natural-born sorcerer's preferred form of divination is palmistry, as a mage does not need or require anything other than what the mage was born with, and that is themselves. A sorcerer heavily relies on symbols, as they can simply be drawn in the air with a finger. This is to exemplify a point, that a sorcerer can go through their entire magical careers using only what they were literally born with, and what they learned along the way. This is not necessarily common, but the point is that a sorcerer needs nothing other than themselves. This is simultaneously their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. Now, let us take a look at the people who take on the path of the Trained Sorcerer or the Sorceress. For those not born into the Great Tree of Sorcery, or for those who have forgotten how to use their abilities, there are ways to mitigate this for those who wish to practice the Tree of Sorcery. In the Eastern tradition of Occultism, there exists an ancient title known as a Chi Master or a Chakra Master. This is the Eastern version of sorcery, which an individual can attain almost the same level of power that a natural-born sorcerer can. Advantage and disadvantage. The single greatest advantage a trained sorcerer has is that of a true dedication and discipline to their craft. You could say a trained mage is a genius for hard work. A trained sorcerer can catch up to most of the advantages a natural-born can, given enough time spread out over a course of enough years or decades, such as sensing energy in themselves and around them or being directed towards them. A trained sorcerer is able to build up a large amount of raw power within inside one's own body through focus. A practitioner is able to harness the hidden power that lies dormant within inside of every individual, close to or equal to that of a natural-born sorcerer, if not even greater, but this would be a practitioner at a master's level. A trained sorcerer can attain or unlock similar abilities through mastery of chakra and meditation, with the proper dedication, diligent study, and practice, as well as, but not to the extent a natural born can. But it will take you a great deal of hard work. Let's look at pyrokinesis, for example. A trained sorcerer may be able to focus the energy of the body to create fire, but it is not true pyrokinesis. A natural-born sorcerer can create the flame, but they can also control the flame, while a trained sorcerer cannot. A natural-born sorcerer can also snuff out the flame using nothing more than a mental control. A trained sorcerer also doesn't have to worry about their ability activating independently of their will. In extreme cases, this might cause spontaneous human combustion, for example. The one true advantage a natural-born has over a trained sorcerer is the instinctual understanding of magic. This is the one advantage that cannot be overcome through training alone. But there is even an exception to this rule. Even though it is extremely unlikely, it is possible for a trained sorcerer to awaken the mark of the sorcerer. It is rare, but it can happen. When or if this occurs, the sorcerer will have an upcharge in natural power. They will also be able to truly understand the ebb and flow of the ether of magic itself. This would be an epiphanous moment that would be unlike anything the mage has ever experienced before. Lastly, a trained sorcerer does not have any of the disadvantages of a natural-born, and that is an advantage all its own. Now this seems like a good place to stop the 5th episode, and I just want to make a quick point. That this episode took me too long to write, took me too long to record, and took me too long to edit. I think it was like 2 weeks or more between the last video and this one. So moving forward, I'm going to really try to keep them down to a 10-minute mark or upwards of 15, so I can try to maintain a weekly schedule of videos. Also, there was one thing I did leave out, so this is going to be out of order. When a sorcerer or sorceress is young, and they're going to either learn to embrace their gifts or they're going to forget them, that usually happens around 7. That's when the abilities will start to fade away. If you keep them, then they'll be matured up to about 13. Okay, so now I'd like to give you my traditional farewell. I wish you all the best of luck with your research, and go in peace.